What does a real estate attorney do at a closing? When I say a closing, that's typically where the real estate attorney appears and helps with a transaction, facilitating the transfer of the property. The biggest breakdown of what a real estate attorney's role is to one, advocate for the client. Advocating for the client, whether it's a buyer or a seller that they're representing, is very, very important. Keep in mind that when you hire an attorney that does real estate for your closing, we represent you. We don't represent the lender. We don't represent the agents in the file. We don't represent the title company. We just look out for your best interest. So it's very unbiased in that we don't have really skin in the game, so to speak. So it's important to hire someone that's objective is just to look out for your best interests as a buyer or the seller. The other thing we do outside of just representing your interests through the moment you sign the contract to the closing, sometimes even after, when there's other issues that arise, we also act as negotiators, almost a mediator between two parties. Keep in mind that the seller typically has their own attorney. The other party, being the buyer, has a separate attorney, a separate realtor, has their own lender. So typically each party has their own attorney. Now, as attorneys, we try to mediate for what each client wants to make sure you get the best result. The other thing that we do is we ensure that all the areas of the legal process, especially when it comes to buying a piece of real estate, have been addressed, have been diagnosed really like from A to Z when it comes to what is it, the problems that we see here, legal problems. We also make sure that we comply with the rules, whether that rule is legal rules, there are rules with the law and contract law, but also local rules. For example, like different villages, different cities, different counties. The amount of rules there are for municipalities is a lot, and every municipality is different. So if you live in the city of Chicago, there's a lot more rules and different type of rules than if you live in the Chicago suburbs. Or if you even go out west, out to more rural towns, there's also different requirements. So we do make sure that we're in compliance with those rules in the state, with the law, and in municipalities where the property is located, where it's being purchased or where it's being sold. So if you oversee the real estate transaction, if your attorney is well versed in this, they do know that ahead of the closing, there's a lot of work to be done. Part of the responsibility is looking over the contract, making sure that everything that was agreed to is in the contract. If you are selling anything specific to the buyer, that would be in the contract. If you're providing something that is outside the norm, that would be in the contract, and so on and so forth. So we do make sure that ahead of the transaction, everything gets stipulated, everything gets sorted out, and there isn't any misrepresentations or miscommunications. And sometimes there are, which is also why we step in to try to fix it if there were an issue. But for the most part, a lot of this work of reviewing the documents and the terms of the transaction really get us in a better place. So that's really one of our responsibilities, to make sure you're protected, make sure that you're served, and make sure that you understand your rights throughout the process. Because after all, signing a real estate contract is still a contract at the end of the day. So there are contract laws and principles that apply to this. Another one of our responsibilities that is important is organizing the closing, completing the paperwork ahead of time. When we represent sellers, for example, there's a lot of paperwork that has to be drafted, from the deed of the home, making sure that the title of the home is clear, making sure we've complied with the requirements for the city or perhaps the county, that we have all parties that have interest in this property to sign on the paperwork that is necessary. Sometimes there's even things that pop up that are outside the norm that we have to address. For example, some paperwork is necessary if you're an investor. Typically, the investors tend to have contractors that did work. So it's important for us to do the paperwork, look at everything, make sure there aren't any liens, meaning no one is owed money by you. We obviously also look over the numbers of what you're going to be either getting from the sale, or perhaps you have to pay things off. So there's a number of things that we have to organize, and it takes a lot of manpower or woman power to do this. So there's a lot of paperwork that goes in ahead of time. Same with the buyer. The buyer has a lot of paperwork through the process. They even have more paperwork when it goes to the closing. So we do review that at the actual closing. We make sure everything's completed, everything's accurate, and there isn't anything missing. The other thing that is a big responsibility as a real estate attorney is to be present. Make sure we understand the files, we understand what's going on with your file. We advise you to the best way possible, especially with thorny issues. There's certain issues that come up that are really not super common. And we try to guide you in the best way possible because we do have experience with this. So we try to say, okay, this is what the best case scenario is. This is the worst case scenario. And we always keep in mind your best interest and try to guide you through the process. We also ensure that everything is complied with on the day of closing. So if for some reason there was a repair that the seller was supposed to do that wasn't done, or perhaps the buyer was supposed to do something on their end that wasn't done, we make sure that everything is taken care of and we make sure things are sorted out. Typically, when this happens, they're called walkthrough issues. So if you have a walkthrough issue the day of closing, whether you're a seller or a buyer, usually the attorneys communicate with one another. So each attorney that represents one of the parties will communicate with each other to try to sort out some of the issues that have arisen. The goal is to try to reach an agreement if possible so that we can actually close the transaction. If there is an issue, we can always go back and try to address it before you actually close. So we make sure that we are present, helping you throughout some of these issues. I strongly, strongly recommend that you consider hiring a real estate attorney, someone who really knows this area, can assist you with the transaction, and isn't afraid to really go in and negotiate when the time is necessary, because that's really important for part of a successful transaction. There are a lot of ways a deal can go south or go sideways, and at last minute, it's always good to have an advocate on your side to represent you and no one else, to make sure someone's in your corner ready to go to bat for you.